Today, I'd like for us to read a popular Bible passage from the writings attributed to John. And while we're going to follow evidence and reason to some potentially shocking ends, just hang in there with me and we'll see where the truth takes us. You're probably familiar with the story of the woman caught in the act of adultery who was brought to Jesus. Now, most Bibles contain a footnote stating the fact that this story was not in the original manuscripts, but was added later, which is actually true for a number of biblical texts. Now, some biblical scholars suggest that the story came from oral tradition that was written down in the 3rd century and added in various places to both John and Luke. The place it stuck was in John chapter 8, which is where it can be found in your copy of the Bible today. While the literal truth of many of the stories found in the Bible can be as unverifiable as this one, just as with any good fable, there is a moral that we can apply to our interactions with others. It's not the historical accuracy of the stories that is important for learning invaluable lessons, but the fact that their messages speak to us today, and they touch a place deep within that recognizes love and empathy, and that yearns to extend that benevolence to others. So today, I'd like for us to read this story and see what we can learn from this timeless literary work. John chapter 8, beginning with verse 2. At dawn, Jesus appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." Okay, let's start at the very beginning and see what we can learn from this story. First, it's interesting to note that the man was nowhere to be found. Since we can't say this event ever happened at all, the fact that the man was not also brought for judgment might be taken simply as a commentary on the mindset of that time. It was the woman who was being accused, not the man. Had she perhaps stolen another woman's inflatable doll, and thus the man was not brought forth? We can probably rule that one out. It's pretty certain that the act of adultery would include at least 2 actual people. Was he married? Or was she married? Or were they both married? The story doesn't say. Was she with a man or with another woman? It doesn't say, but given the time period and other contextual factors, including the fact she was the only woman captured, we can assume this story was about a heterosexual affair. But let's put the apparent misogyny aside for another time. Now, I've heard a number of speakers speculate on why Jesus was writing on the ground and what he was writing. Some suggest he was referencing the book of Jeremiah by writing the names of the accusers in the dust of destiny, so to speak, while others say he was writing a list of the accusers' own sins. And both of these are fine. After all, we can't say this is an account of something that actually happened, and speculating on a work of fiction is akin to writing your own version of the story. But let's leave those ideas for now and go back to the original saga. Let him who is without sin cast the first stone. Beautiful, deep, piercing. He could also have said, who are you to judge someone else? Are you without flaw and beyond the judgment of others? This could be a call to introspection. Am I really any better than the person over whom I am presuming to stand in judgment? This is a very powerful lesson to learn. We tend to be so judgmental. We condemn those in other religions because they also worship false gods. We label as fools those who do not believe there is any God at all, without considering whether we have any real proof to offer them. We denounce other Christians who come to conclusions from the Bible with which we disagree, without questioning whether we could be mistaken as well. We don't know the story behind the story, if there is one, of why this woman was with her lover, assuming she was not being raped. And along with the rest of the characters in the story, we assume she was doing something inherently evil and thus deserved to be judged. But what can be safely implied from the narrative was that Jesus was rejecting the supposedly God-given command to put her to death. Was the Old Testament law moral? This Jesus apparently didn't think so. If Jesus' disagreement with its directives was moral, then the Old Testament laws were immoral and could not have come from a moral God. But if the Old Testament law was indeed moral and was the infallible Word of God, then Jesus' suggestion that it be ignored made him immoral, and thus not the perfect Son of a moral God. So we can conclude that either this story shouldn't have been added to the Bible, implying that the woman should have been stoned to death, or we can conclude that basing our morality on every ancient text men choose to include in the Bible is not a reliable method of making moral decisions today. What do you think? Should she have been put to death as their Bible commanded? Or was this presentation of Jesus' act of mercy more moral than their sacred texts? And if our rationally justified estimation of right and wrong goes against the supposedly holy scriptures of Jesus' day, just as his own sense of morality did, how can we apply that same moral code to our reading of the rest of the scriptures today? But that's not the point of today's story. Neither do I condemn you. What do you think? Was Jesus proposing a grading curve? If other people do something wrong, then is your doing something equally wrong okay? In the story, the woman did not ask for forgiveness. She did not profess a belief in Jesus or ask him to live in her heart. She did not say a sinner's prayer. She was not baptized, and she did not confess any sins at all. In fact, all she said was an answer to Jesus' question of whether anyone condemned her. She said, "No one, sir," to which he replied, "Then neither do I condemn you." She could have said, "I condemn myself by confessing my sins to you," to which he could have replied, "Then you are forgiven." But instead, no one condemned her, not the accusers, not Jesus, and not herself. How often do we judge ourselves? How often do we feel as though we are worthy of death because we've had certain thoughts or certain feelings or certain desires? How often do we judge others because their actions don't line up with the same scriptures which the Jesus in this story chose to defy? Long before this drama was written, Paul wrote his letters, and many of the ones supposedly penned by him have been identified by biblical scholars and historians as having not been written by Paul at all. Mark's author is unknown, Matthew's author is unknown. Luke's author is unknown. John's author is unknown. Some of the other books of the Bible have been identified as forgeries, not written by the claimed authors at all. And yet, the example of Jesus, regardless of which stories about him are reality or myth, live on today. We know that we should show love to all others, even if we think they are wrong. We know we should show mercy, compassion, and forgiveness. We know we should not judge others because in doing so, we are judging ourselves. And we know that even death is not the end because those whose lives we have impacted with kindness, compassion, empathy, acceptance, forgiveness, and love live on. And they pass on that unspoken message of goodness and love to generations to come. One thing that we can learn from the message of the cross is that of sacrificing our own ideas and preferences to the acceptance that the other person is not us. Their stories are not ours. Their upbringings and indoctrinations are not ours. Their desires and perceptions are not ours. And as a society, we thrive only when each member is given the liberty to be who they are, love whom they love, and live how they live. Should we condemn those who married, grew apart, and find themselves to be different persons than the ones who first said I do, and part ways to live their lives fully? Neither do I condemn you. Should we condemn the men who, by no choice of their own, are repulsed by the mere thought of an intimate relationship with a woman, and then they fall head over heels in love with a man the same way that we might have fallen in love with someone of the opposite sex? Neither do I condemn you. Should we condemn those who grew up being taught other mythologies and worshiping the gods of other stories, being as convinced of their scriptures as we might be of ours, making the mere thought of converting to Christianity as hell-worthy as we might judge our converting to theirs to be? Neither do I condemn you. Should we condemn those who do not believe claims without proof, such as the claim that the earth is flat, the universe is 6,000 years old, or the Bible is the Word of God? Neither do I condemn you. The story of the woman caught in adultery was added centuries after Jesus was said to have lived and died, but its message and moral claims are no less valid than those found in any other ancient texts, and we should judge them all on the precepts they relay. If we refuse to question what we believe because that belief demands we do not doubt, how are our convictions any different from any other cult, superstition, or dogmatic and unprovable belief? And since we can probably all accept, given the clear evidence, that this edition, written hundreds of years later, is indeed a work of fiction, the story we've told today, what can we say about the last words, "Go and leave your life of sin"? We don't know the woman existed at all. But if she did, we don't know she was actually doing anything that challenged the well-being of anyone else. We don't know the circumstances. We don't know the details. We don't know the story behind the story. So we don't know whether there was any so-called sin at all. And you know what? It's perfectly fine to not know. In fact, knowing you don't know is much, much better than not knowing but thinking you do. Innocent women were burned to death because the church knew they were witches and knew the Bible was just in saying witches should be put to death. Joan of Arc was burned to death as a heretic because the church knew God wanted her to die. Copernicus died before he could be murdered by the church for the heretical claim that the earth and other planets revolved around the sun, not the other way around. And before we object that it was the Catholic Church that performed all these atrocities, keep in mind that the Catholic Church played a role in canonizing what we call the Bible, and it was a Catholic who crafted the version of the doctrine of the Trinity that we know today. We think we have it all figured out. We think we have arrived at the absolute truth. We think that our doctrines are correct, our scriptures are infallible, and our moral imperatives are universally true. But if our accusers are not perfect and we do not condemn ourselves, then perhaps we would do well to ask, how does this affect the well-being of myself and those around me? And then answer with either verifiable facts or the powerful, liberating words, I don't